Greetings and thanks for attending today's webinar on data insights, how to focus future efforts, and pinpoint marketing budgets. My name is Jamie Gleason. I'm the Director of Undergraduate Initiatives here at Capture Higher Ed. And I am really excited. For those of you who might know me, who have maybe listened to some other things, I am very excitable when we talk about behavioral intelligence and how we can narrow the field of focus when it comes to budgets and use of tools and even time. I'm really excited about today's webinar, and I'm even more excited about the guests that we have joining me today. I'm joined by two data science folks. I'll call myself the host of the webinar today, and I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves right now. So, Rich, John, thanks for joining me today.
Go ahead, Rich.
All right, thanks, John. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here. My name's Rich Majerus. I work at Queen's University of Charlotte. At the university, I lead institution-wide strategy, focused specifically on leveraging data, technology, and partnerships to enhance our revenue and efficiency across the university. And in doing so, I work with offices all across campus. Specifically today, we'll be talking about partnerships with admissions and financial aid, where we do work with Capture. But prior to Queens, I worked in advancement at Colby College and admissions at Carleton, and helped to run a higher education focused data science startup for 5 years. And doing all of that, I've dragged my family around the country for about 10,000 miles over a dozen years, all within the States. So with that, I'll turn it over to John.
Hi, I'm John Foster. I'm one of the data scientists at Capture, and work largely with our predictive modeling, as well as a lot of internal research of, what can we learn from the data we're collecting, and how can we get better from looking at that.
Great. And today's the beauty of today is that it's the segue, right? Today is the segue between predictive modeling and behavioral intelligence and how those things come together. Sorry, I'm trying to find my mouse here. There we go. Sorry about that. So for those of you who are not familiar, let me just give a 2-minute overview of who Capture is and what we do in the industry. Capture is an 11-year-old company. We work exclusively in the area of behavioral intelligence and how that trickles into things that John just talked about, predictive modeling. You can see on the left of your screen the 4 products that we offer: Engage, Apply, Aid, and Enroll. The bottom 3, Apply, Aid, and Enroll, are predictive models. The top one is a behavioral tracker for website activity, and it bleeds into a whole bunch of other areas for us understanding how students and influencers are working, what they're looking for, what they're doing on your website. And then as you see on the right, one of the things that Capture really likes to do is combine these elements of data and figure out what is the right mix of things, right? I love that term, the Internet of Things, but this is the right mix of things in order to get the optimal result. We use digital, we use print, we use email, we use search. There's all sorts of these items that are all mixed together in order to put together the precise solution that meets your enrollment goal. And then my favorite part is the service providers. John and I are among the folks who are in the purple here. We get the privilege of working with folks like Rich and our other clients in order to really make the whole thing work together. Many of us have had tenure in the educational institutional atmosphere, so we enjoy getting out there, getting our hands dirty, and really being a part of the solution for the over 100 institutions that we currently work with. So that's Capture in 2 minutes, or maybe it was more like 90 seconds, I'm not sure. But if you have any questions, you can feel free to go to capturehighered.com and hit us up for contact. And I think at the end of the show today, there'll be a way that you can do that too. Okay, enough of that. Let's get on to the real stuff. So today we're going to cover 3 things, and the good news, or 4 things. And the first one, we've already got that box checked. Who is Capture? We're going to take a look at 3 other major elements of what's going on and what we've seen. And I think the backdrop of today's webinar is really that Capture has been watching student behavior on websites for the better part of 5 or 5.5 years or maybe more. And we've gotten to see some very interesting things. We see how these things add up, and I'm actually not going to go too much into it because this is really what John does on the everyday level of understanding like what happens here and how does it work going forward. So I'm just going to turn the floor over to John in 1 second. But as I prep for that, one of the things that I did want to do is talk a little bit about a couple of terms. We're going to use some terminology, and in order for you to get the most out of today's webinar, I think it's probably important that you understand kind of the terminology that we ascribe to the student journey through the pipeline. So here it is. This is my graphic, so don't blame our marketing department for how it looks. I did this 100% on my own. Essentially, what we want to make sure that we emphasize today is that your website is important. And you already know that. If you didn't know that already, then that's your takeaway for the day. But there are two types of users on your website, those who we know who are there and those who we don't know who are there. As you see on the left, the anonymous web visitor is one who oftentimes will not respond to your RFI form, and they just continue to come back as stealth users. But what we've seen by installing Capture's tracking algorithm on our client websites is that we have the option of proactively going after students with a thing that we call the progressive ID form, or it's aptly known as the PID within the office or within our client base. And we have seen some phenomenal results as we have put these out into the ether. So you can see there on the bottom left our organic PID. Again, that stands for a progressive identification form. The statistics are when we put a form in front of a student, they apply at a rate of 27.4%, and they deposit at a rate of 4%. And we'll show you what the non-PID group looks like later on. And then on the right side, you'll see the identified web visitors. So these are students who we're sending emails to. We're identifying them through digital campaigns. We know their IP address. We see who they are. We see that they have transitioned into your web environment. Some come back, some don't. That's where the frowny face comes in. But the ones who do, Capture has the ability to apply an affinity score. We call it the Capture Affinity Index. And that affinity index is a powerful predictor as we think about today, predictive modeling and how behavioral analytics are a feeder to that. So that's the end of me. John, why don't you kick us off here and take over from what we've seen?
All right. Yeah, great. Let's talk some more about those PIDs and other forms of what we were calling affinity prospects. So again, like where we're looking at here where it says organic PID, those are students who came to your website anonymously. You didn't know who they were, but they were searching out information on their own. That's the way it works mostly today, right? Is you can reach out and try to market to students, but mostly they're going to try to search out and find the information about schools on their own, and they're doing that largely by going to your website. So then we serve this form says, tell us a little bit more about yourself, your name, email address, and this stuff. And then so students who fill that out they have this built-in interest, right? They're already on your website. They're willing to fill out a form, and now once you know who they are, you can talk to them more directly through an email or phone call. You can serve them content on your website that's more relevant to who they are and their interests. And we found that you see that those students are applying at a much higher rate. These are students who may have ultimately been a stealth applicant, but maybe not. Maybe they would have lost interest along the way, and so you're able to nurture that relationship. The Capture Affinity Prospect is again a measure. These are students who have shown interest on your website, and they reach a threshold where we say they're as good or better than your standard inquiry. Student who filled out an inquiry form. and so you see that they don't apply quite as high as those students who fill out the form, but a much higher rate than just your standard suspect in the pool. And same thing for deposit rate. You see that ultimately these students go on to apply and deposit. And Jamie talks some about the CAI. It's a scale from 0 to 100, just saying of like, here's how much interest they've shown over time. You see a nice curve there from bottom, left on low on the left, high on the right. That students who show more interest over time do end up applying at much higher rates. If they have that score above 50 or whatnot, they're more than 50% likely to apply. And we see this over time too, that, even after applying, those students that continue to show interest, that don't drop out, they're the ones that are going to go on to deposit. So nurturing that interest, giving them information that they need, that they're interested in knowing more about, building that relationship with those students is important. But it starts with largely them displaying interest. You can obviously drive some of that toward the website the first time, but you got to keep them coming back somehow.
That's the challenge, right? Keeping them coming back for more is often the challenge. So as we think about this, John, what we're really seeing is that students who maybe otherwise would kind of abandon your website, if you can pique their interests and keep them returning. And this isn't time sensitive, right? This isn't just for seniors, but if we have, underclassmen that we can hook early and watch them over time, build their identity into it, and then have them, become Affinity. So for those of you,
all right, Jamie froze a little bit there. All right, he froze. I'm going to keep talking. But I guess the big point here is that students, what interest they're displaying on the website really ties into how interested they are. That's a major point of contact, especially, it's been growing over time. And, this year is a big move forward in that direction. As they're not able to gather as much information face to face, they may not be able to come to a campus visit or some other events that you're hosting, college fairs or any of that. They're going to be gathering even more of that information on the website.
Am I back?
You're back.
Okay, sorry about that. Probably my kids are downloading some YouTube videos or trying to understand more what TikTok is, what we were talking about earlier. All right, John, thanks for the insight on that. And one thing I wanted to add is that one of the values that Capture adds to our partnerships with our clients is that these students who are returning to your website over and over again, we actually will isolate them and send them over with that label of Capture Affinity Prospect. Now, every client has the option of saying, you know what, I'm not going to add them to my CRM as an inquiry. But our recommendation for a search lead who keeps coming back to your website over and over is put them into your higher priority ranking, so that way they're receiving the communications they need in order to take that next step toward application.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is the way they're demonstrating interest. It used to be that they filled out an inquiry form, and that's still sometimes the case, but they're demonstrating interest by coming back to your website over and over. Yeah. Looking at comparing those inquiries to students who fill out a form saying, name, email address, those sort of things. They're applying at 4 times the rate. So those stealth visitors are very interested, even more so than a standard inquiry.
I have to do a shameless plug here. PIDs have often been my favorite piece of dynamic content. And one of the things that I love about them is that they're proactive, right? They pop up in front of you. They say, hey, we want to know more about who you are, instead of like your standard RFI form on the sidebar. I think that, to me, is a huge benefit of progressive identification and dynamic content that we offer or engage.
Yeah. Well, and there's another, like on your decision tree there, another little branch that we haven't really talked about are those students who decline to fill out the form or, and continue anonymously to explore the website. As we gather information about them, we can serve them content relevant to them, even though we don't know their name or anything. We know, okay, they've been interested in these things.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we can send them a little information about that. And ultimately, we see a lot of those students do end up going on and applying. They just kind of want to, hang back a little bit, stay a little bit more anonymous.
We've all been there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, John. One of the things that you'll, for those who are attending today, you'll actually receive not only this slide deck, but we've also written up some more information about some of those trends. There's actually more detail in the long form that will be coming out after the webinar, but this is what we really wanted to get into. Thanks, Rich, for hanging here with us. We're going to transition from what we've seen to what do we do about it? Because we all know that this is an age of uncertainty that we're living in. Many of our higher ed clients are, struggling on the daily for, how do we work through these dynamics or these situations? How do we fill the lead pool? How do we do this and that? So Rich is actually in the trenches between financial aid and admissions, like he said. He's doing what he does in order to kind of read the uncertainty. So, Rich, take it away. Help us out here.
I'll do my best, Jamie. Here we go. Thanks again for having me today. Honored to be here and be a part of this, and to thankful for our partnership with Capture. As you can see on the slide, Queens is a comprehensive university located in Charlotte, about 3 miles from what we call Uptown. Every other city I know calls it downtown. But we've got 2,500 students across our undergraduate and graduate populations there, and we're fortunate to be in Charlotte, one of the fastest growing cities in the U.S. and I think the second largest financial center in the U.S. to New York. And then I'll come back to some of those points as we go forward, because I think your context and where you are as an institution needs to inform your strategy and how you work through these certain challenges that we're all facing right now, but they're different depending on where you are. And so, at Queens, we've been working with Capture on admissions and financial aid, specifically predicting enrollment, right, and trying to model the impact of financial aid on enrollment at the university, specifically primarily focused at the undergraduate level. And this has been really productive for us even through all the pandemic times. Up until last week, we were up in enrollment and in doing better in discount rate versus previous years, and also ahead of our goals for this year that we established before the pandemic. But at the end of last week, we announced a transition to a virtual fall. And so we'll see, what the impact of that is, right? We're still working through that, but are in conversations now with the group at Capture about, how do we anticipate that? Right? What might that look like? So that overperformance, positioned us well to mitigate hopefully some of the impact of the melt, right? And we're still using our predictions. We're just thinking about them a little bit differently, right? Because we know that this is going to have an impact and probably decreased likelihood for a lot of students to enroll when we're talking about a virtual fall, right? But we have seen the opposite too of students actually coming back and saying like, okay, now that you're online, I feel more comfortable and I'm gonna actually enroll for the fall, where maybe I was gonna wait a year. And so we're working with the team at Capture to try to figure out how do we make sense of that, right? And another thing we've worked closely with, and I'd recommend other places looking at, is actually survey data, both from your community and also just national data. Like, one of the things that we saw early on in conversations was this increase in people being worried about finances, which was obvious, and then a big increase in their interest in staying closer to home. And so, I think that's good information to have, but it's only valuable if you use it And so we created a partnership with Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools and all of the private schools in our county, and created a new program called the Queen's Commitment for our residents of Mecklenburg County, a special scholarship program, a special enrollment process specifically for those groups because of where we are, right? And because of our connection to the city, and our commitment to working with our community to get through this, we were able to launch that program. So I would just ask and encourage you all to consider how you can reshuffle your priorities, right? Leveraging where you are, thinking about partnerships, and how you might be able to both support and benefit from your community or your region during this time. So I'm going to try to not use all my words on this slide. But a data person like John, and so I think I got a pretty strict limit per day, and so we'll see how I do. But there's a lot to talk about and a lot to say about kind of the challenges that we're all facing right now, and I think a lot of them are still emerging. Some of them are quite apparent at this point, but on the short-term challenges, I think most all institutions, are working through some budget challenges right now, and a lot of those challenges are exacerbated by enrollment challenges too. Right? And so, I think some of the strategies you might consider around those now are going to be relevant next year and perhaps even longer. So, I'd encourage you to the extent possible, to try to invest in quality long-term solutions and programs that'll live hopefully beyond the pandemic, and to commit to supporting again your community, try to become a top choice locally, and to keep in mind that I'm a firm believer in this idea that people are going to remember how institutions treated them during this time, right? Everybody's going through their own version of this right now, and so people remember places that stepped up for them.
That's an interesting point, Rich, because I remember early in the pandemic, I was listening to another webinar where there was some survey data about the retail industry and how retailers were really hitting this spot, like this emotive spot of like bigger picture, doing things like not necessarily seeking after profits, but really seeking after that like feeling. And I think your point is well heard there, because I believe while higher ed is certainly there's a sea change going on within higher ed, the muscle memory isn't going to go away for the people who for the institutions that respond well to what's going on.
Yeah, and so in our one of our recent board meetings, one of our I think really thoughtful executive committee members brought up, think about what are you doing for people who are sticking with you, right? Who are supporting you through this too, right? And how are you supporting them as well? And so I think there's all sorts of ways to think about that, to put something more concrete out there that we've talked about, right? We haven't committed to doing anything like this yet, but I think think about in programs that are focused not just on recruitment but on retention too.
Sure.
And one idea, just to throw something out there, is rather than increasing discount rate on the front end, right? Maybe you consider for students who make it through to their senior year, especially if you're a place with a graduation rate that's around 50% or 2/3, which most institutions are, maybe you're giving the last semester of senior year for free or at a significantly discounted cost, right? To both incentivize recruitment and retention and to support people through this process. And so I think trying to be creative, right? And now is a time for some of those bolder ideas. Mm-hmm. And I think that, the places that are able to do that will be more successful.
Sure.
I think there's a number of other challenges that are looming, I think, beyond these short-term budget challenges and enrollment challenges. Something that I worry about quite a bit is, the issues we're facing now are first-year enrollment, right? But I think that the challenges of this pandemic are going to move up that enrollment funnel to the prospect inquiry stages, in part because of what's happening with the testing environment right now, what's happening with traditional sources of name acquisition, right? Those aren't going to be, as flush with new names in the coming years, right? There's more places going test optional, more standardized tests getting canceled or getting postponed, and I think fewer people taking them. And so I think it's important for places to start to think about what John was talking about, right? How are you using digital methods to build your funnel, right? Rather than just traditional name buys.
Sure.
And then one other kind of longer term thing that sort of keeps me up or wakes me up is I think trying to get some of this solved and built out before we face this kind of like demographic challenge that's coming. That Nathan Graw, I went to Carleton. He's a faculty member there. I wrote about when he created this idea of the higher education demand index and looked at demographics. And the number of high school graduates, what it boils down to, is going to decrease in the mid 2020s because of the contraction of the birth rate during the Great Recession in 2008. We're now creeping up on 18 years after that. And so I think that places that don't think strategically and take action now with an eye towards the future, these two challenges are going to converge, and you're going to have a real problem that you might not be able to recover from if you don't prepare beforehand.
Sure. I think that's a great point. I mean, I think that it's really easy to think about the here and now, but there are things that are happening in the here and now that have those long-term impacts later on that we definitely need to be prepped for.
Certainly. And I think, that's those are the places that can turn this challenge into an opportunity, right? Because with this environment, every place that doesn't have $1 billion+, even many of those places are struggling and in ways that they haven't before. And so the places that are able to think strategically and make the most out of this have an outsized opportunity to kind of elevate their profile and their prominence. So.
Sure. Let me ask you one thing, Rich, and I'm going a little off script here, but what is, this has been an age of innovation, right? Like there's been a lot of conversation about the creative process within higher ed. And I think we all know that the academic world can be somewhat sluggish when it comes to be adaptive, but are there particular things that you have done or been a part of that have really helped toward, maybe even if they haven't been implemented, but a modality toward more innovative thinking? Are there things that you are doing at Queens with your fellow staff members or faculty members that are helping you to think creatively about the process?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think that's an ongoing work. I think that the places that are going to thrive are the places that do that, right? And it is higher ed was having challenges before this, right? Yeah. And now they've really just been exposed a little bit more quickly, right? And I think more broadly. And so the places that think about this differently, right, than what you've done in the past, or then looking at your traditional peer groups, right? So we're looking at a bunch of different schools than traditionally that Queens has to think about what have they done, right? So we did a study of, and this was prior to pandemic, but I think informed our strategy at that point, and we've revisited it. What are the institutions that have really elevated themselves over the last 10 years in terms of all of these metrics? We looked at probably 50 different things, and then did different case studies of these places, and then talked to them, right? Of the higher ed still, at least prior to the pandemic, hopefully after it, relatively collaborative. And people are usually willing to brag about how they did it. And then you can get some ideas from those folks. And then, we've also, again, thinking about where we are and taking advantage of our location. We work with, leaders of, some of the largest companies and banks in the world. And they have representation in our leadership at the university. And so we're able to, I think, get that outside perspective that we really value
Sure.
Because we need to drive that innovation. And, as you said, right, like higher ed hasn't always been a first mover, but I think now the places that do take bold action, right, it's not without risk, but the rewards are bigger, and the alternatives are not great at this point.
Yeah. Well said. I think that's those are good words to hear. I want to be sensitive to time. I know that for those of you who signed up for the webinar, this says we said we'd be 30 minutes. We're already a touch over that, or potentially getting very close to it. What I want to do is, so I don't watch a lot of ESPN, but I know that sometimes there's like these segments where at the very end they say, okay, well, what do we expect for the next week or the next this season, blah blah blah. So this is our ESPN version of that. So like, where does this end up in your mind, and how does this? How do we forecast the future? John, quick hits on how do we forecast the future?
Sure. So looking to the future, again, prospective students and their families need the web more than ever. There's a lack of opportunities to gather information face to face, going to campus, college fairs. They need good information, relevant information from your website, and that's where they're going to go to get it. So, capitalize on that. Looking at forecasting the future, we've talked a lot about behavior for good reason, but don't forget about demographics. Your demographics are not going to dramatically shift from one year to the next. For instance, a lot of people are talking about staying closer to home. We talked about it a little bit earlier. And so I looked at, for our schools, from March through June, who deposited compared to last year. And there was a little bit of that trend, but not a huge shift. So, the median student, I think, was 3 miles closer to campus than the previous year. So,
sure.
So there are shifts, but let's not throw out the past either. Recognize that some of the shifts are going to be more nuanced. As you try to reach into new groups as well, don't forget about this kind of your core students that have always been interested in you as well. But that being said, behavior is the best indicator going forward. This year, we in our predictive modeling, we relied heavily on deposits compared to previous years. How do they match up? Knowing that things are going to be different, but also knowing that was going to be our best indicator.
Sure.
And so that did change a lot of our predictions. They looked different in May than they did in early March. Queens as well as others. So keep trying. Pay attention to that behavior. Deposits year to year, apps year to year. Your web visits as well. That's going to be your best indicator of who's interested and how you're doing.
Great, Rich, you're up.
All right. I would say that as I think I was suggesting earlier, if you're not going to do innovative things at this moment in your institutional history, when are you going to do them, right? and I think that it's important, right? As John was saying, right? That doesn't mean disregard everything that's been going well for a century or more, right? For you, but times are changing, right? And we need to I think about, again, where you are and what that means for your particular institution, right? Both in terms of, are you in a city or a rural location that might look differently? But what everybody can do is think about, more of these digital sources of name acquisition, right? I think that's going to be increasingly critical part of what we all need to work on, both because of what I mentioned in terms of what's happening in testing, but also just the nature of how students are getting information about colleges these days, right? And to be mindful of, we no longer, control that communication flow, right? Students are the actors in that, right? They're going out to get information. It's not like we have this neat, marketing plan of 40 different pieces we're going to send out, right? we need to build out the website and then drive people there.
Yep.
And then try to customize that to the extent we can to individual users, so it does feel like we understand what they're looking for, right? And we meet them where they are.
Sure. All right, so here are the key findings for this is actually mine, I guess. But what I'd say is, like, let's make sure that we're making data informed decisions and using the elements that we talked about. As I was my former life a director of admissions here in the Philadelphia area, understanding how to spend the dollars is always a challenge. I think that's even more of a challenge when the dollars are restricted and when you don't exactly know how it's all going to shake out. We do have a lack of data, right? Like, this is a well-known thing that no one has no one knows what the predictive model looked like during the Spanish flu. So we don't have the predictive analytics are not there. We have no plumb line for this. But more than ever, we want to make sure that behavior is calculated into the modeling. So Capture, I like to boast about Capture a little bit. This is where we excel, because we do mix that into the recipe, into the secret recipe, and watching that behavior is a critical part. For those of you who are listening out there, don't forget to measure ROI. This is a critical time. Your investment into vendors and to partners in the industry matter. I always worked at institutions that had a very shoestring budget, so I was very close to watching ROI all the time. If it didn't make sense on the budget, then it had to go. Make sure that you can measure that, and if you can't, then really ask yourself: is it a tool that you need to keep using, or you certainly shouldn't take the salesperson's word for it that it was worth the investment. So with that, I want to say a huge thanks to John and Rich. This maybe is the first of a few that we're going to do relative to the data science, because as we all know, the demographics are changing. We might see a significant change through the month of August as we actually see the plans go out for institutions and understand these things. This is a very dynamic world. We want to be walking it with you. So thanks for taking the time, guys, for being with me. For those who are out there listening, thanks for attending. Check us out on capturehighered.com or go to the URLs that you see there to get more information. And that's it. See ya.
All right. Bye.